get to my last patient, probably like the 50th patient of the day. She had been waiting about 2 hours. I said, really, so sorry to keep you waiting. She just unleashed on me, okay, like totally ripped me to shreds and then walked out. She just waited that long just to rip me, okay? And so I drove home that night. I had, wife, 4 young kids. I was almost in tears. Fast forward in November of that year, my partner and I at the time became the 10th and 11th doctors in the country to start a concierge boutique, if you will, medical practice. I will go on the record and say the majority of medical visits to doctor's office are made up of one or two things: lifestyle choices and behavioral health issues.
Welcome to the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast.
Welcome to the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast. I am your host, wellness, fitness, nutrition coach Drew Griesel from Primal Wellness Coaching. Our guest today is a fun one. We have Dr. Charles Glassman, also known as Coach MD, on the show today. Dr. Charles practiced internal medicine for over 30 years, but during this period, he observed that many, if not most, problems that people would seek medical attention for simply come from daily life challenges. And so he decided to flip the switch a little bit, and instead of automatically giving them a pill to try and make their challenges go away, Dr. Glassman sought to empower individuals with information and guidance so that they could learn to better take care of themselves. A good doctor's mission should be to put himself out of a job with each of his patients, rather than getting them hooked on a pill they have to take for the rest of their lives. Teach them to take care of themselves. So shout out and kudos to Dr. Charles for that, because it's an approach that takes a lot of nerve. Dr. Charles, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Drew, thanks for having me. Really privileged to be on your show.
Well, thank you very much. And for our audience, this will actually be our second chat, because I had the privilege of being on Dr. Charles' podcast, the Coach MD podcast, recently, which I will link to in the show notes for this episode, so you can catch that side of the conversation as well. But today is all about me, because now I get to ask all the questions.
Right. Love it.
So I've gone through your short bio, Dr. Charles, and it starts by just kind of giving the backstory of 30 years in internal medicine, right?
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can just take some time to expand upon just kind of your career, how you got started, what brought you into medicine in the first place, and the evolution of your whole career. And maybe that's a really big topic, but maybe the slightly longer version than your bio, but not the 6-hour version.
Right. Well, I was born on a cloudy day, and
there you go.
Right. Well, I was kind of one of those kids who said they always wanted to be a doctor, kind of thing.
Okay.
But I think that,
and you followed through. Good for you.
I did. Yeah. Well, that's definitely a lesson, because a lot of people say, "Oh, I wish I knew what I was going to do. I wish I had a purpose, a meaning, or knew what I was supposed to do." And I can't really say that I really knew what I was supposed to do, because when you're a kid, a lot of it is, feedback and
Mm-hmm.
parental feedback, adult feedback, and
Yep.
what you're getting. And when a little kid says they want to be a doctor, I mean, what does that do? In a lot of communities, it's, whoa, wow, that's great. Yeah.
Yep.
So I got a lot of that, a lot of encouragement, and kind of looking up to, certainly in our area, the prestige of being a doctor. I think all of that kind of went into the collection of me wanting to be a doctor. I wasn't necessarily the best biology student or loving science kind of person or kind of kid, but it just had that feel, that I wanted to do that. So, it gave me one of the best things it did was when I got to college, it really made me laser focused, and so it got me to do really well in college, because I knew what I wanted to do.
Can I backtrack a
Sure.
couple of years? So you've discovered this kind of interest or pursuit as a child, but
Yeah.
can you recall like how that came to be? Like was there
Yeah.
an inspiration in your life or a family member?
Well, I think probably my mother.
Okay.
Look, my ethnic, religious origin, whatever, is Jewish, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's always the cliche, and it's actually probably not so much of a cliche that uh, my son, the doctor, okay, and
Okay. Right.
in many in many cultures, that's a big thing. I
Mm-hmm.
know there are other cultures besides the Jewish culture where that's a big thing, but especially in the Jewish culture, for instance, there's a joke going around where a Jewish mother is her son, the mother of the president is at the inauguration, and she's really proud and everything, and there's someone next to her, and she says to the person, she said, "You see that guy up there? His brother's a doctor."
Okay.
So that's kind of like the inside joke about how important it is. So I think that kind of encouragement, and when I was growing up, just to date myself, way back in the early 60s, there was a show on television called Dr. Kildare. And
Okay.
Dr. Kildare, I was kind of, I think, watching it when I was like 4 years old or whatever, and I had a doctor there. My mother used to, when she's with the pediatrician who I kind of connected with. So I think that kind of, did give me some of that encouragement going on, that kind of
Okay.
feel. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, so, going into going into college, again, I was laser focused and I really wanted to do, but I was really always kind of holistic minded and not just the science and not just the physical and not just uh, uh, kind of our five sense approach and kind of it knowing that we were more than just our physical body, but mind, body, and spirit together. And I, from an early age from early training, I always had that interest that that we should, if I was going to be a doctor, that's something I needed to explore. But I didn't, again, the lure of the prestige kind of sidetracked me a little bit. And what I mean
Okay.
by that is, instead of going into what I eventually went into, internal medicine, which gives you that opportunity to sit down with people and to explore more than just the physical body and knowing more about people's lives and their experiences, I started out as a surgeon. Okay, because
Oh, no kidding.
I had to do that, right? I
Okay.
had to
Well,
be, I
that's
had
the
to
ultimate prestige right there.
exactly, I had to have that experience. So it didn't take me more than the internship, though, the surgical internship in the Bronx in New York, to really confirm that this isn't for me.
Okay.
It wasn't
And
for
why
me.
was that it wasn't for you?
Well, a good example of that is on on rounds. I had a medical student with me, and the medical student, we were taking care of. We were taking care of, but we were overseeing the care of one of the hospitalized patients, and the medical student was a really great student and wrote a really great progress note. Okay, it was like a 2-page progress note, so really
Okay.
detailed and about the person, whatever. So just joking around, I put an A+ on it. You don't grade those things in the hospital. I
Right.
mean, this is real life, right? I put an A+, a small A+, just joking around. And so the chief resident, who was this hot shot, kind of typical kind of surgical mentality. No offense, my colleagues, I love you, we need you, but you know who you are and you know what you do. So this surgical chief resident comes around, and there's a nurse note, and the nurse's note has one sentence on it. So he puts an
Okay.
A+ on that. Okay. So that's just an example of,
Yeah.
what the person obviously is, and the nurse, they're very good. And that was just a kind of joking around because they did write other notes, but this was purely an example of how when you uh, when you're taking a step back and really want to be looking at the whole person, it's not about just cutting out the gallbladder. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you do need that sometimes, but it's really understanding the whole person. And at that
Yep.
point, I knew I was going to go into a different residency program and pursue
Okay.
internal medicine. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
And backtracking just a little bit out of
Yeah, sure.
curiosity, when you were in college and you were kind of looking at things from a holistic lens, mind, body, soul connection, did you feel like you were an outlier in that, or did you feel like there were other folks in your class that were also thinking of those things?
I'd say there were others. Yeah,
Okay.
we kind of connected with some other people, and we talked on our when you were on my podcast about my experience in the martial arts, and
Mm-hmm.
that started when I was in medical school, and that really not too many. Obviously, not too many of my classmates were in that class, but there were some, and we're like-minded, and also meeting other people in the hospital community, in the surrounded with the medical school,
Yep.
who were involved in that class. And certainly, karate is uh, considered mind body, where you have to consider all the martial arts, as you know, um, go much deeper than just the physical, and you
Right.
do tap into a part of yourself that is much greater, that transcends that physical. And so, yeah, certainly the martial arts, and going into college, I started getting interested in that too by taking a lot of English courses,
Hmm.
and really exploring characters, and we had a great English department, and really going into
Cool.
that, and that really helped, I'd have to say, going forward also in that pursuit. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and that's great, and I commend you for that because you kind of make yourself a more well-rounded person, but also a more well-rounded doctor by keeping that in mind. Even if your laser focus just went towards, okay, well, this is what they're going to teach me, and this is what I'm going to do. But the other stuff was always there, right? You had the focus. You continued doing the martial arts throughout because you made it all
Yes.
the way to, I believe you said, second degree black belt. Is that
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Nidan. Yeah.
Yeah. So you followed through on that pursuit. So you were maintaining that mentality even outside of your school and your residency and all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
I just say you did something a lot of people don't do, and that's you kept yourself open to the fact that there's more than just this strict protocol and this strict learnings of medical school itself. And I can't speak too much to that because obviously I've never been through medical school, but I've
Right.
I've spoken to a lot of doctors, and there's a fairly uniform approach to medicine in Western society. Um, but you can complement that with so many other things, which is kind of what you're talking about here.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what really hit me, and kind of set the stage for what I'd explore later in my career, was the idea of white coat syndrome. And if your listeners, I'm sure many of them know what white coat syndrome is. And basically, it's when your blood pressure goes up when you go to the doctor, because it's intimidating. The doctor's wearing a white coat, and
Yeah.
the whole circumstance, you're dealing with the staff, and you got to wait, and you wait in the wait, it's all this stuff. And so when I was studying for my boards, after the second year, and we were learning how to take blood pressure, I had my roommate take my blood pressure, and our boards were a month away, and we
Okay.
were really studying hard. So he takes my blood pressure, and when when my blood pressure was measured all throughout my life, it was always 120 over 80, 120 over 80,
Yep.
which is quite normal.
Right.
My pulse was fine. So I was feeling my heart skip a beat every now and then, right? And for your listeners, that doesn't mean anything. Okay. I mean, I'm not giving medical advice, but
Yeah.
when you get nervous, sometimes your heart does that. Okay. So my heart was doing that, but I was young. I was, I don't know, early 20s, and I'm studying for my boards. And if people don't know that, you get every single ailment that you're studying, you're getting as a medical student, right? You think you have. So he takes my blood pressure, and he gets, I think, 130 over 80. That was it. Okay, I freaked out, right? I freaked out.
Yeah.
So I think I went home that weekend, and my parents were all, oh my God, you think you have high blood pressure, you're only, I don't know, 23 or whatever. they take me to this cardiologist at this medical high, big shot cardiologist. Takes my blood pressure 140 over 90. So now it's getting to that. So anyway, make a long story short, I still have some white coat syndrome. I don't. It's not quite as bad, and I don't have any. I've aged quite well, and I don't have any sequelae, which means any side effects of high blood pressure. But every now and then, if someone takes my blood pressure, it might do that. But I measure my blood pressure myself. But the reason why I'm talking about that is because that got me, as well as the martial arts, I started trying to understand why our brain does that, why we react to something that is not dangerous, but why does our brain perceive it as danger? And so I started reading this book by Herbert Benson, who studied the monks in the Himalayas.
Okay.
His book was Beyond the Relaxation, or the Relaxation Response, and then Beyond the Relaxation Response. And he taught a very specific type of meditation, which I started to follow. And he talked about the monks in the Himalayas and the amazing things that they can do. And right around that time, we had 1 hour lecture about that. Okay, so it was right around the same time, maybe a year apart. And I remember that one lecture and reading that book had the most profound influence on me.
Really?
And any course, because it told me that what we're capable of, what the human mind really is capable of controlling our brain. And by that, you had these Himalayan monks who were able to take down their adjust what we think is automatic reflexes. They were able to adjust those, their breathing. They were able to take down their breathing to maybe a few breaths a minute. They were able to increase their body temperature, be covered by a cold towel, and instead of shivering, they were able to raise their body temperature up just through thought control to dry out that towel. They were able to control their blood pressure. They were able to control to shut down their metabolic rate and their breathing, so they could be in their oxygen needs. They were able to control all of those bodily functions just by using their mind. So I figured,
and that's gained a lot of I guess visibility in recent years because of Wim Hof.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's very much along the lines of what he does.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so that mind control, I thought that, okay, there's a lot going on. We can't just be, in and out, rushing with our patients here. Oh, you're anxious. Okay, take this, Valium. Okay, you have high blood pressure. Take this. Yeah. I mean, what can you do that's more? And that really got me. But again, I wasn't able to put that into practice necessarily until later on in my career.
Yeah, and so you didn't. So you studied it. You were interested. You were moved by this. You weren't able to put it into practice until later. So what was your experience like, just working in internal medicine up until the point where you were able to kind of go the route that you wanted to go for yourself?
Yeah. So I would do these things myself and try to myself be healthy and meditate and in the way that I was doing. But in a typical practice, I started in a practice with one other individual, and right out of the gates, I was seeing 30 patients a day.
Yep.
And soon after that,
sounds exhausting.
It is. And then if 30 is exhausting, how about 50? Okay. And so you're in and out, and very, I really couldn't take it anymore. After about, I think I was in about 14 years. I couldn't take it anymore.
It's 50 a day even possible?
It is.
I guess not. Maybe not with high quality conversation. But...
No. Well, there you go. It's not high. It's in and out medicine. It's
okay.
The term is treat them and street them. You treat and send people back. So I mean, our appointments would be triple booked. Okay. I'd be working 2 hours more than my schedule. So
yeah,
I mean, people would be waiting 2 hours, and it was 2 consecutive Mondays in March of 2002 where these proverbial S hit the fan. Okay.
Okay.
So the first one was I was waiting for, I was working, and I get to my last patient, probably like the 50th patient of the day. She had been waiting about 2 hours. It was in the far back exam room. I
Okay.
walk in the through the door, and I said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Really so sorry to keep you waiting." She just unleashed on me. Okay, like
Okay.
totally ripped me to shreds and then walked
Yeah.
out. Okay, so she just waited that long just to rip me.
Wow.
Okay,
Okay.
and so I drove home that night. I had you know wife, 4 young kids. I was almost in tears. It
Yeah.
wasn't until the next Monday when I was really in tears. Okay,
Okay.
and that was when a bunch of other stuff happened. Uh, a woman came in requesting records from her husband who had an aneurysm like 6 months before. So we said, "Oh boy, here we go. We're going to get lost. We're going to get sued or whatever."
Yeah.
We never did from that, but that was it was another crazy day. I went home crying.
Okay.
So a couple of days later, I saw an ad, or not an ad, an article in the New England Journal about these new practices that were opening up, which were concierge practices where people would actually pay a fee so they can have you as their doctor. And I thought, what a concept. So fast forward in November of that year, my partner and I at the time became the 10th and 11th doctors in the country to start a concierge boutique, if you
Hmm.
will, medical practice. And a lot of people on the outside saying, "Oh, they're elitists," and our colleagues saying, "Oh, what kind of people are they? They're only appealing to the wealthy, whatever." Well,
Yeah.
it wasn't until then that I was able really to practice the kind of medicine that I thought was best for my patients, and the demographic of my patient population was far from just the elite. Certainly, we had people who demographically were considered well-to-do or wealthier than others, but we
Hmm.
had a lot who just valued their health and they
Yep.
wanted a relationship with their doctor,
Yep.
so they didn't want to have to go through what I had to put them through, or what I had to go through. And they had a more relaxed doctor, a doctor who could really talk to them and treat them the way that doctors really ought to be able to treat their patients. And I don't fault my colleagues. They're just put in a very bad position the way the
Sure.
healthcare is going, and it's even worse now that they're employees, most of them, and that they have to see those patients now. It's not even their own practice. When I say have to see those patients, I mean see the quantity of
Yeah.
patients,
Yeah.
and it's not even their own practice. So that's kind of what got me able to sit down and really get talking with people.
One of the most simple hacks to improve your overall quality of life, including things like energy, immunity, mood, and more, is to get better sleep. And I am going to help you sleep better completely free. The thing is, sleep is easy to ignore. Life gets busy and sleep loses priority. There's a problem, though. Where many of you want to sleep better, you can't seem to. The thing is, so many things have become a part of a normal lifestyle in our society, which are secretly sabotaging many aspects of our wellness, including sleep. That is why I created the Hack Your Sleep program. In this program, I am going to give you a number of low to no cost, simple to implement hacks you can start doing right now to fix your sleep. By using these tips and hacks, you will fall asleep easier, stay asleep longer, and most importantly, sleep deeper, allowing your body to cycle through the many stages of sleep multiple times throughout the night. That is how recovery happens. That is how you wake up feeling rested, energized, and ready to unleash your best self. And because you're a Superhuman Blueprint podcast listener, I am going to give you access to this course completely free. Go to hackyoursleep.net and use code SUPERHUMAN at checkout. That is hackyoursleep.net. Superhuman at checkout. This will get you 100% off and on the path to getting better sleep than you've had since you were a kid. I'm curious, and I don't know if you can do this because obviously every patient experience and every patient need is different, but like could you give a comparison of like a general overview of a consultation in your in your prior career and then a consultation in your concierge practice?
Right, sure. So um, we would schedule what's called a complete physical examination. So somebody would come in, and we used to a lot of times fall back on that. So, for instance, if someone came in with a cough, and I mean, yeah, they came in for a cough, but so many times I would say, yeah, but I did want, now that I'm in here, I really have to talk to you about this thing that's been bothering me, whatever. And we'd always say, oh, schedule a complete physical examination. We'll talk about that. So the
Okay.
complete physical examination would be, 2 months down the line or whatever. And that complete physical examination, FaceTime with me would have been really not that much longer because
Okay.
they'd be with the nurse doing an EKG or a breathing test. So it seems like they were there much longer, but really true FaceTime with me probably be 10 minutes, 15 at the most.
Okay.
Okay. Whereas when I had my concierge practice, we would set a complete physical examination for an hour and a half. Okay.
Yeah.
And basically, we would sit down and talk, and sometimes not even talk anything about medicine. Most of the time, talking about life and
Well,
what's going on.
lifestyle is a huge part of a huge factor of health, right?
Exactly. As the majority, and I will go on the record and say the majority of medical visits to doctor's office are made up of one or two things: lifestyle choices and behavioral health issues, emotional issues. Those are the two. Okay. Yeah, there are
And that's
some
where you
that
became coach, huh?
that's it.
You
I
became
became
coach
Coach
instead of just
MD.
doc. Coach
Exactly.
doc.
I mean, how could I ignore these things? I mean,
Yeah.
when you actually start sitting down and talking with people and life, I mean, you have to. And so I became that, gradually I came up with the name Coach MD in the shower one morning because I'm thinking, like, what am I really doing? I
Yeah.
said, well, Coach, I'm going to just call myself Coach MD.
Yeah. And I told you this before, and I'll say it again. I love it. I absolutely love that
Thank you.
because
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
doing you are coaching people, right? And you're coaching
Yeah.
them through dialogue and through curiosity and through caring. And I'll just share my own experience. Getting something like a complete physical examination is very much what you would have done in your past. They don't ask me any questions other than whatever's on the intake form. Really, all they do is look at results and tell me what they see. Like
Yeah.
there's no exploration into how I live my life.
Right. Yeah. So, for instance, let's say, and I had done a podcast on this, my very first podcast actually on cholesterol. So, a lot of docs will just reflex. Okay. Oh, you have a high cholesterol. Well, they don't know that Drew is in, talk about, primal blueprint. Drew is in primal shape. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Good shape. Okay. So, let's say Drew has a high cholesterol. That doctor doesn't know that Drew has a great lifestyle, fitness, and is in great shape. Why does, what's a medication going to do more than actual, living a healthy lifestyle? Some people genetically, fewer people, and most cholesterol, for instance, is lifestyle, but some people are genetically programmed to have a high cholesterol, but it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
mean there are other ways to evaluate. It doesn't mean you have to go on a pill, but unless you know somebody's history, know their physical, it's different when somebody comes into my office. And I had a lot of people come in to see me over the years who are in lousy shape. I mean, I could just see that just by looking at them. I know they're in lousy shape. And they say, oh, I came to you because I'm holistic. And I know you're holistic. I
Okay.
don't like to take pills. Well, I basically said, well, unless you completely do a 180 on what you're doing with your life, you're going to have to take pills until that changes.
Mm-hmm.
And, just kind of backtracking to when I was in my crazy practice, the stress that I felt, I remember a guy walked into my exam room one day, and he was visibly very bad shape, and he was probably no more than 50. The first thought I had, and doctors will deny this, but I will tell you that this is how doctors think: malpractice, even though it it's not it, you know, it's nobody's going to lose their career over it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But doctors are always thinking about that.
Okay.
The very first thought that came into my head was, oh boy, now I'm responsible. If anything goes wrong with this guy when he walks out my door, I'm now responsible for it. It doesn't matter his 50 years of bad choices.
Yeah.
Now that I'm his doctor, excuse me, if something goes wrong, it's going to be on me.
Yeah.
And after I changed my practice, I didn't think that way. It was gone. I never had to worry about protecting my butt. Most doctors will say that.
Sounds so much more peaceful.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's better health care. It really,
Yep.
Yeah. Really better. And that's the one thing also that that I'd mentioned to you when we were talking on the podcast, that I never like to think of myself as taking care of people. When you're in that shuffling of you are basically, you have that mindset. I got to take care of you. I got to give you something that's going to take care of you. When you're in the mindset of being able to take a step back and really learning about somebody's life, you get in more of a feeling of I want to give somebody the tools, the ability to learn, to educate them so they can take care of themselves in the best way that suits their lifestyle and their community and their upbringing, whatever, their culture.
And I don't recall if I shared this with you when we spoke before, but when I was first starting to pursue really becoming a fitness coach, before I evolved into focus on more whole body wellness, I had a close friend of mine who's been overweight pretty much his whole life, and he just said, "Hey, you've got all this training now. I want you to help me lose weight." I said, "Cool, you can be my guinea pig." But he was already fit. He was strong, he was muscular, but he also just had a lot of body fat. And so it kind of, it made me rethink what would have been my approach based on my training as a fitness coach. And so we really focused on lifestyle and for the purpose of losing fat. And he did. And it was amazing. And we focused on all of these just lifestyle changes for him. I did help him to be more strategic with his workouts because he worked out plenty. It wasn't done in an organized way. So we organized his workouts. We just changed all of the other little things in his life. And yes, he dropped a whole lot of weight, maybe 60 pounds or something. But what really spoke to me and kind of got me thinking, I can impact people in so much more of a profound way than simply gaining muscle or losing fat, is he went and did his physical and got his labs, and he always had high cholesterol. He always had high blood pressure, and these things normalized. And it was completely unforeseen. He just sent me a screenshot. He's like, "Hey, look at this." I'm like, wow, that's amazing. These guys, I think under 40 at the time, and had been on meds for years for this.
Wow. It's so interesting because, a lot of doctors, when they see that, they won't even ask, how did you do it? I'll just keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
Instead of wanting to learn what did this guy do that allowed me to be able to take, but they don't have time to sort that all out. And, it's really, the mindset is so important. And so when I had time to sit down and talk with my patients, one guy came into me and said that how great he felt when he sat in the room talking with me, because as I said, we would talk for an hour, and he'd feel great. He'd be invigorated, inspired, but then he'd go back into his life, things would fall apart. So he asked me, was there a way that I could keep him from falling back?
Interesting.
And that's how I started really kind of delving into myself, because I started writing him a weekly email, and then which grew into a bigger email list and writing, and it turned into my book.
Wow, no kidding.
Brain Drain. Yeah, because I had to look into myself. Like, if I had white coat syndrome, I had to figure that out. Like, why do I have white coat? Why should I get nervous about something which is not really dangerous.
Right.
And so by doing that, I came up, what I felt was, at least for me, kind of the missing piece and understanding that I needed with the way that our mind and brain interacts, and how that affects how we live our life and how we stay motivated. And there's a lot of applications. So I wrote this book called Brain Drain,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of led into my social media stuff. And then I wrote another a book called Fake News Stories by Your Brain, which I think is better than Brain Drain. And then, so that's, I was able to have time and people would say, oh, how do you do that? How do you have such a full plate? Because I have family and practice, but
Four kids.
Exactly. And that's my therapy, though. That was
I've
my
only got
therapy.
2 and I'm exhausted.
Right. I know. I saw the pictures of you at Disneyland. That was great. One of our favorite places, Disney World, but
Okay.
Disneyland, sure it's in your area, so it's nice.
Yep. I can hear the fireworks every night at 9:30.
Right. Yeah. But so that, looking into myself and trying to help my patients, trying to figure out, how the thinking about the monks and bringing that back now, full story. I started thinking about, I think there's a difference between our mind and our brain. We have these automatic reflexes, which I've defined as the automatic brain,
Okay.
which
Yep.
does whatever it takes by all means necessary to protect us from danger, threat, and vulnerability. And
Yep.
when it detects danger, threat, or vulnerability, whether it's real or imagined, and that's key, because like my blood pressure, the white coat syndrome thing, that's imagined. I didn't have any danger, but the perceived danger was a lot of things stored in my memory banks from childhood. Me being told that my uncle died of a heart attack,
Mm-hmm.
my grandfather died of a heart attack, that, other things too.
I know, and in some religions they'll say you even carry that forward from a past life. So,
and some would say that, right?
Yep.
And so this is really important, because not only we talk about whether it's past life or even generational inheritance. And so
yeah,
there's a really, which has been pretty much shown to be true, is the factor of epigenetics. So let's say now that we know DNA, we have the same, we all have 46 chromosomes, right? We have 23 pairs of chromosomes in our body, which have genes. And if there's what's epigenetics, which means that our genes can change or can be programmed to turn on and off. So let's say that we have all this stuff that we're bringing from childhood, trauma, tension, me being told that my, whatever, the fears of heart attacks, whatever, imagine dangers, okay? All of that's stored, perhaps. And if you can kind of train or retrain your brain through a higher mind, okay? I go into all of this in my book, whatever, brain drain and all this. I don't want to get into real specifics, but perhaps if you're changing one gene, you don't just change a gene. It's not like there's a gene hanging out there. It's in every gene in your body, every cell in your body. You don't change a gene in one of your strands of DNA. Okay, I mean it's genetic, it's changed, right? So you may change. Certain, obviously cells have different biologies, whatever, but you're turning on or off certain neurons or whatever. So anyway, if you're able to understand that these automatic processes are caused by your brain's perception to keep you safe, if you realize that what is it really that you're perceiving as danger? And so I was imagining the danger, yet I was having the same exact response, the fight or flight response, because when your brain detects danger, threat, or vulnerability, whether real or imagined, there's only two reactions. It's fight or flight. Some people say freeze, but freeze really is when you're fighting and fleeing at the same time. It's just, you're just so overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And But the same reaction that I was getting by somebody putting a blood pressure cuff on my arm was the same sensation that I would get if I saw a police officer in my rearview mirror, if I saw somebody coming up to me on a dark alley going to mug me, or if I saw a lion approaching me, the same exact response.
Pretty
So
wild, right?
yeah, but what's that about? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a primitive response. That's our animal response.
Mm-hmm.
That is our animals. They respond to, that's all they're reacting. And so these reactions are causing much of our physical illness. And if we could take a step back and realize that that's the case, and then through our higher mind, which I call our divine nature, which is our connection with the divine, with whatever you define that as it is, I define it as God, that connection. When you can tap into your higher consciousness and be able to understand what are the triggers, what are your dangers, what are your threats, what are your vulnerabilities, a lot of the times couple that with lifestyle and you're on the top of the world. I mean, you're physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you're really at the top of your game and really enjoying life when you can do that.
Or
Yeah,
the opposite, if you're not aware or managing that, right? You're in a constant threat state. You're inflamed. You've got no energy. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, and it's scary. So, and I trace that back to our childhood because our brains develop fully by 99.9% by the time we're 15 years old. So from birth to 15, certainly there's some changes afterwards, but those are locked in. So
Okay.
I don't care if someone comes from the perfect, quote, perfect childhood, they're going to have connections, associations that only a child's brain makes.
Yep.
That are not true, but they get locked in there.
Yeah.
And they serve as the basis of what is going to be a reference point later on as adults, what we view as dangerous. So me, for instance, having that stored in my brain that my uncle died of a heart attack when he was 40, my grandfather at 42, whatever, even though that didn't correlate with any of my life was so different, my lifestyle was so different from theirs. None of that mattered. All that mattered was that was locked in there.
Yep.
And that was my reference points for danger. Now I'm being told I have high blood pressure. Oh my God, that confirms it, right?
Okay. Right.
I fight or flee. But the fighting and fleeing is the adrenaline, the cortisol, all that bad stuff. And that just makes it worse, So, it's understanding that, I could go into it deeper too, if you think it would be helpful about how we understand because I have to categorize everything. So I had to categorize the actual dangers. Okay.
Yeah.
And
okay.
I kind of broke it down to three. There's the one-up danger when we have the experience where a person, place, or situation is possibly going to be one-upping us. We're going to be in danger of them or that situation as knocking us down. Then we're going to either fight it or we're going to run away from it.
Okay.
The threat of losing love is a very big one, and that's really it's not even the love; it's really the safety and security. So, but there was a study done years ago where they took a infant ape away from its mother, and they put it in a secluded cage, and they gave it everything it would need to survive.
Yeah.
But that baby withered and almost died until they brought it back to the mother. And that's because it didn't feel secure. It didn't. So that the loss of love, many of us, and we know it in relationships, if many people in relationships, if they're the danger of losing love, they don't even know why they're fighting for it so desperately. But it's really that danger that they may lose their security. And that's a very animalistic or primitive,
that primal need for companionship.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the third one is the one of the comfort zone. So we all have our and this is a big one in childhood, even in the
Mm-hmm.
quote perfect childhoods, right?
Yep.
When our childhood is what we're familiar with, the culture of our home growing up is what we're familiar with.
Yep.
So, for instance, let's say the dysfunction and yelling and screaming and arguments was the familiar of someone's childhood. When they're older, 30s, 40s, 50s, it's almost as though if something is functional, if something is peaceful, it's almost dangerous because it's uncomfortable, it's unfamiliar, it's
Yeah.
unexpected. And sometimes people will fight and flee that back into the dysfunction. So these are just things that I kind of, developed an understanding for that why what causes this fight or flight reflex, what causes this automatic reactions, and what we can do to take a step back in our higher consciousness and deal with it. So, for our health, for our sanity, really.
So for the listeners,
Yeah.
I'd love for you to kind of help me out with this. So let's say our listeners are they have an appointment with their general practitioner. They're going to go in and just kind of talk general health. And it's just their regular GP, right? They're going to get, unless they manage this, they're going to get cycled through in 5-10 minutes.
Yeah.
But maybe they don't want that. Maybe they want to have a conversation. So if they're not getting asked lifestyle questions, what lifestyle focal points should they bring if they say, hey, I want you to sit down and have a conversation with me and I want to talk about these few things and I want you to tell me how those might be impacting my health?
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I would take the ChatGPT approach.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is that ChatGPT is a really great, useful tool if you prompt it correctly.
Okay. Yep.
So if you go into your doctor's office with you walk in and you open up your book and there's a ton, you're going to shut that doctor off, right away.
Yep.
Okay, that's one thing. The second thing is have your prompts written down ahead of time. Really very precise, specific prompts. Okay, most of the stuff you could find on your own about your own health and that you don't need your doctor to even tell you.
Right.
So I would do some research on those topics first, but it's always good to have a medical opinion. So do your research on the questions you want to ask, and then develop a very specific prompt of, let's say, I would say 3 questions tops, because you're gonna turn off the doctor right away if they're in that mode like that. So I would figure out the top. Well, first of all, things in your life that let's say, let's say you want to get more fit and lose weight, like Drew was talking about. You can go through and do research on that. Do a lot of research. Do your own research on that. Don't expect your doctor to do the research, because once you do that research, I can almost guarantee you probably know more than what the doctor is. But there are going to be some medical questions. So, for instance, let's say you're on medication and you read about this supplement that's great. Again, a general question would be, does vitamin C interact with this blood pressure pill I'm taking? Don't ask that question, because your doctor's not going to know.
Right.
Okay. What I would do is I would do your research on it and tell the doctor what you found. And once you told the doctor what you found specifically, ask a very specific question that you have.
Okay.
Very specific, zone, like really. And that's why I said, like ChatGPT, you could ask ChatGPT, write me a novel. Okay. But, if you want, first you have to start out with a paragraph. Write me a paragraph about where the protagonist has this and the whatever, the environment, and you have to be very specific. So, so do your research on the kind of questions you want to ask, narrow it down to 3, and be very specific with the information that you want to get from that trained professional, because the medical doctor has the knowledge, has a
Yeah.
lot of knowledge,
Yep.
but you also have gained knowledge,
Right.
and you, in some ways, are educating the doctor a little bit. So tell the doctor what you found in your research, and then what question you have about what you found, but be very specific.
Okay. Yeah, I like. And what's interesting is you actually, you very much just described an experience that my sister and I had with our father and his doctor. So a few years ago, my father was diagnosed with a bone marrow cancer, and so he was sent to an oncologist, and my sister and I were kind of in it with him to work through that. And as a family, we are inclined towards a more holistic approach to healthcare. The oncologist is like, okay, you have this cancer, chemotherapy. And so we're like, okay, well, what's the chemotherapy? Can you tell us more? Like, what kind of chemotherapy?
Mhm.
So, we had to do some exploring into what they wanted to do without us really bring anything of our own to the table, because they really offered up very little information on the front
Yeah.
end. And this doctor is great. Don't get me
Yeah.
wrong. This
Yeah.
oncologist
No,
was,
no, I hear it. Yeah.
once we made it clear we wanted to pursue dialogue and we were curious, she was very happy to give us information. But I think a lot of people just don't have that curiosity. They say, okay, this is a professional. They want to tell me, go do chemo. I'll see you next week. Okay, cool. I'll see you next week.
Yeah.
We asked a lot of questions, and then we went and we pursued our own knowledge on the holistic side of things, right? So we looked at supplementation, we looked at lifestyle, we looked at all of these different things that can, one, support battling cancer itself, and two, support not getting wrecked by chemotherapy. And so in follow-up consultation, we brought these things to her. Okay, so this is what you want to do. These are the things that we're looking at that we want to do. Let's talk about how we can do these together. And some of the things that we want to talk about, she didn't have knowledge of. And she would just say, I'm not comfortable speaking to that because I don't know. And then there were a lot of things that we brought to her as far as supplementation and dietary lifestyle that she did have knowledge on,
Mm.
but we had to get her to talk to us about it. So I'm just going to call it out. I think that's a huge failing on the part of the doctor to
Yeah.
not address lifestyle and, anything that someone can do to have a better experience in such a terrible situation.
Yeah.
But but she would talk about it. So once we said, okay, let's talk about these things, she's like, oh yeah, okay, so this supplement, yes, it will do this, but don't take this one because of this. And so we actually we did continue to have some good dialogue throughout the cycle of going through that.
Yeah, that's so important. And so a couple things that I want your listeners to know. And this is just not to challenge the doctor, but just to keep a mental note of it. If you ask a doctor a question, the doctor says, "Oh, there's no studies to show that." Just make a mental note that the doctor just doesn't know. That's a
Right.
way of the doctor. That's the doctor's automatic brain. Okay,
Yeah, go look at PubMed.
fighting and fleeing the one up trigger.
Yeah.
That I call. Okay, because the doctor doesn't want to be one upped by the patient.
Right.
So the doctor will say, "Oh, there's no studies to prove it." Meanwhile, you go to PubMed and there's probably 3,000 studies. But say that, just make a mental note. Don't challenge the doctor.
Right.
Second, I'd like to give an example, a personal example. My wife was years ago, 20 years ago now, was diagnosed with breast cancer, early stage breast cancer. So we went to an oncologist, a friend of ours. Actually, she came to our house to talk about it. And she said that lumpectomy and radiation would cure it 86% of the time. But she said, but many doctors are going to recommend chemotherapy, are going to recommend hormonal therapy. So, and she, might have, and a lot of doctors will tell the patient, and that's what we would recommend.
Yep.
But we asked the question further. Okay, so it will cure it in 86% of the cases if we just took just the lumpectomy alone would be 86%.
Okay.
And then she said, then doctors do radiation, chemo, and hormone therapy after that. So we asked the question, well, if that's pretty good, 86%. What if you added the radiation? She said, well, that'll increase it to 90% or 92%.
Okay.
What if we added the chemo? Oh, well, studies show that that'll increase it to 94%. Okay, 94%. That's not that much more. And chemotherapy is pretty rough, right?
Yeah.
And if I could tell you, if a study is actually showing only a 2% increase, especially the doctors who are doing research on these studies, and most of them are getting grants from pharmaceutical, whatever. If it's
Yep.
only showing that, then I don't even know if it's that much. Okay.
Right.
And then hormonal therapy, 95%. Again, the same argument. So ask and find out and know really how are people doing? Because chemotherapy, you may win the battle, but you lose the war. You're left with neuropathy. You're left with so many other complications, a higher cancer risk of other cancers in the future, possibly. So you really got to know the percentages and just, like for instance, in a lot of the cholesterol, there's a difference between relative risk and absolute risk. So relative risk is like that 2%. Okay, it helped you by 2%, but absolute risk, 2%, let's say, for instance, if it's out of 100,000, I mean, 2% is what, 2,000 or 100? Yeah, it's 2,000. I think it is. Well, let's say 100. Let's go with 100.
Sure.
So if you're asking, like for cholesterol, for instance, a lot of the studies show that cholesterol will decrease the risk of a heart attack by 50%. Okay, so that's the relative risk. But
Yeah.
that's what I'm talking about. The it's not 2% is the absolute risk. The relative risk is 50%.
Okay.
So, but what does that mean? That means that if you took 100 people and out of 100 people, it prevented a heart attack in one more person. So that 1% is 1 out of 100. 2% is 2 out of 100, but it actually went up 50. You actually decreased it by 50% because half of 2 is 1. So you've actually, your relative risk is 50%. And that sounds unbelievable. I wanted, if I knew that a medication was going to decrease my risk by 50%, of course I would take it.
Yeah.
If I knew that chemotherapy would decrease my risk of getting cancer by that much, of course I would take it. But if you look at the absolute risk is only 1 out of 100, let's say, which really isn't much for the other possible side effects that can happen. So I'm not saying that chemotherapy is never indicated, and I'm not saying you should never listen to your doctor. I would never say that. But you have to have a conversation, but have the questions written down. Try to be as specific as possible and limit them to the best you can. So if you have a limit that you can ask, then you're not going to alienate. You're not going to tune the doctor out.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so I would say that it goes to show that you can have a dialogue with your doctor, even if your doctor isn't actively pursuing a dialogue with you. But 2, I'm not going to say you can be your own doctor, but you can pursue knowledge on your own. And that's a beautiful thing, right? Because of the wonder of the internet, there is so much information out there, and of course you have to sift through all that information because you can find all kinds of conflicting information on the internet as well. If you want to believe something is true, you can find something on the internet to support that it's true. So you got to look at things from different angles, but go to PubMed, right? You can find studies, and these studies will indicate whether they are conclusive or they're inconclusive, or it appears as this, but more research is needed. So you can figure out how concrete some of these studies are as far as what it is that they're seeking to prove or to show. And then there's just this whole world of wellness, right? And wellness and medicine are not the same thing. Ideally, if you're focused on wellness, then you don't need medicine, or you don't need most medicine that you might need. And that's where, if you can find a doctor that has a knowledge of medicine but a focus on wellness, then I think you're pretty set, right? Because yes, medicine, there are situations where you really need like true medical intervention. But if you're focused on wellness, then you can mitigate many of those situations before they ever happen, or you can resolve existing medical situations that you might be in, medical conditions, through lifestyle change. And like you said earlier, don't just like take yourself off of whatever it is that you're doing to
Right.
manage your situation, your condition, but know that you may have other options.
Yeah, I think that's crucial, and it's important to realize too that most doctors' education on wellness is very limited. So nutrition, maybe a course or two in medical school, certainly not Eastern type intervention. So
Yeah.
fitness, and all that stuff, most doctors are going to have to self-educate, or they're going to have to live that kind of lifestyle and be curious and learn on their own. But that's not to say also, as you were saying, Drew, that you don't want to have a doctor. It's always good to have somebody who's advocating for you, who's
Mm-hmm.
knowledgeable, who has some authority also,
Yeah.
to be with you in situations where you need somebody. And it's also important to understand your own bias, where you're coming from, because
Yeah.
you could have a bias toward wellness, like it's a holistic, which is
Yeah.
broad. And so there's so many just things that are not going to work, that you have so many people saying do work on one end. And
Yeah.
on the other end, you have very conventional Western medicine, which you're having, that doctors are saying are going to work and are the only thing you could do, which isn't for you and won't work. But it usually lies somewhere in the middle. That's why
Yeah.
the term integrative medicine was used. But I mean, you could live one way or the other. It's true, but I always say the defining part between all of it is mindset. If there
Yeah.
was one, if there was one a cocktail, one elixir that I could recommend, other than exercise, okay, that's that you could do physically, but mindset and exercise are the two, and your attitude, mindset are the two, and exercise are the two that will really give you the best shot at living a life where you don't have to necessarily seek medical care, except to get a kind of a reassurance that you're doing the right thing. You may just go to the doctor just for validation that, hey, yeah, look, all these numbers are good. I'm
Yeah.
on the right track. If you want that, sometimes you may not even have to do that. But
Right.
yeah,
Yep. And there are definitely extremists on both ends of that, right? I mean, there are the people
yes,
that are hardcore on the holistic side and they want nothing to do with Western medicine. And then there are folks that put 100% faith in Western medicine and think that the holistic side of things is a bunch of woo hippie stuff. But
yeah,
like you said, it's, I like to come from an approach, and we all have to check ourselves on this sometimes, because we all carry our own biases, but I like to come from a place of curiosity on everything, right? Okay,
yeah,
well, you're going to tell me about some drug. Okay, well, let's talk about the drug. Let me learn about it, right? I'm inclined to not be interested in drugs, but you know what? They have their purpose, and some of them are very effective at what they do, and
mm,
if not a cure, then it can at least help you manage something. And while you pursue, the holistic side of things. So like you said, these things can work in tandem.
yeah. Curiosity is the key. That's a great way to look at it. Is to have that radical curiosity. That
Yeah.
to really learn it. Getting to the how the holistic side, and there's a great example. I wrote a blog piece on this some years ago. I recently updated it on Steve Jobs, because
Okay.
he's a great example of how somebody was diagnosed with a tumor of the pancreas. The type of tumor of the pancreas, by the way, which is completely curable by resection, by surgical resection. It's not
Okay.
the kind of what's called adenocarcinoma that's diagnosed stage 4 and that you're dead in 3 months. It was a different type of pancreatic cancer, and it was a tumor when he found out about it, that he decided that he was going to treat it with Eastern practices.
Okay.
And my blog piece was that he was letting his automatic brain control him. He was
Hmm.
afraid of being one-upped by uh, doctors, by the scientists, when he was kind of this open-minded, know-all guy.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have somebody tell me I'm going to meditate this away. But the fact of the matter is that I don't disagree with him that something caused that tumor possibly in his psyche or in his automatic brain or whatever, and that there are ways of dealing with it. However, he doesn't know what caused it.
Right.
Nobody knows what caused it. He doesn't know it was an imbalance of his yin and yang or his consciousness or whatever that was out of balance. He doesn't know what it was. Nobody could know what it was. So until you know what it was, sometimes you'll need the Western medicine, get rid of it, take care of it with the way we do that, and then circle back and do those things to maybe prevent it from happening again or explore what might have caused it.
Right.
So I think that's a good example of how you can be all in on one of those things without the curiosity of how this other might help me.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the result was not a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so if we have any kind of your standard practice doctors out there that are interested in pursuing more knowledge around like how to take the approach from a perspective of wellness, how would you direct these folks? Like what would you tell them to, how would they begin that pursuit?
I would begin it with yourself, kind of how I began it with myself. I tried to figure out, about the white coat syndrome, so the psyche, but then I also thought about what am I going to do? What would I do to keep myself well? What do I tell my patients to do? Am I doing that on myself? What's my lifestyle look like? What's my fitness regimen? What are the supplements that I would put into my own body? What are those things that I would do? And then I would start doing your own research, because that's what I did. And I would listen to my patients too. That's another thing. When your patients tell you that this is what they found on the internet, don't shut them out.
Okay.
Because a lot of that information, a lot of people will know much more about their particular situation, lifestyle, or even illness more than you could ever know, and learn from your patients. I've learned so much from my patients, so much.
Yeah.
And some of the things I learned from them, I'm doing on my own.
Yeah.
Whether it's supplements I'm taking, whether it's fitness that I'm doing, that's that's how I would start it. But don't start doing burpees like Drew 100 at a time.
No, do 100 burpees. Come on, anyone can do it.
No, we all like to joke around about burpees, but do you know the guy, the burpees? You know the story, the guy who invented it. His name was Burpee. His last name was Burpee.
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in like the 30s or something, or 40s.
Oh, that's why it's called the burpee, huh? Poor
Yeah.
guy. He'll go down in history as just being forever hated.
I know.
Not by me. I love Mr. Burpee.
No, I know. I do too. I love to hate it. Hate that.
So that's actually I kind of wanted to wrap with that. So tell us, what does Coach MD do to maintain his own health and wellness?
Yeah, mind, body, spirit, baby. So I as I said, I believe that we have a higher nature, a higher divine nature, our communication. So I believe in it strongly in a God, in the God of the Old Testament, if you will. And so I do pray, I meditate, and that's very helpful for my, vital for my spirit.
Yeah.
For my mind, I also do that, and I try to eat well, and be mindful in the things that I do. So when I'm eating, I try to be mindful while I'm eating. So I will eat slowly. I will focus on the tastes and the senses that go along with that. I'll keep up my relationships, because relationships are so important. I'll try to be financially mindful, and that's also so. The spirit and the mind is a lot about your general circumstances, and my body. You can't underestimate the the importance of physical fitness. I'm in my 60s now, and I compete. I do CrossFit. That's my mode of exercise. I love it. Um, I think that it's
CrossFit's in, I mean, that's all in.
yeah. I mean, you're right, exactly. So it's about functional fitness. So
Yeah.
when people say CrossFit, a lot of people get nervous about that, but it's really functional fitness, and it was invented by a guy named Glassman, also no relation.
Okay. Okay.
But and he was a gymnast, and he noted that a lot of the movements that he did were very helpful in life, and a lot of us, the movements that he has to do, most of us don't use. So um, I think that I talked about mindset and exercise, attitude and exercise as being the two most important elixirs for anti-aging or healthy aging. I know that, chronologically that, or biologically, I might be in my 60s, but chronologically, I'm really much, much younger than that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's it's very important that people, and if you haven't been exercising, you don't go all in. Just like all the things I mentioned,
Yep.
just like supplementation that I use. I take supplements also, which is a whole other discussion we won't go into. But I do
Right.
supplement wisely, supplement for conditions that I develop as a aging male.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's it's important that you don't go all in on anything, because you're just going to get burned out real quickly. You have to go slowly and start slowly. But you have to remember and keep in mind the mind, body, and spirit. And
Yeah.
it's all, if to live a full life, it's those are the, and a healthy and a truly healthy and well life. Those are all things have to be in balance.
Yeah. I love that. And
Yeah.
you walk the talk.
Thanks.
So do you
Try.
still work with patients or?
Yeah,
Okay.
no. Yeah, as of 2019, just before the pandemic, I left that practice,
Uh-huh.
and it was time. Um, it was sad, because I used to joke around with my wife that have a whole family she doesn't know about, because really they weren't. And when she came to the going away banquet that we had, people were coming up to her crying, and I realized, it's true. But I was
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, but it was a responsibility that I was carrying on me that I needed to walk away from at that time. It was, and
Yeah.
then we transitioned it. I transitioned it to a guy, very well equipped, very good doctor, who
Nice.
carried on the concierge model. And
Mm-hmm.
now, besides the Coach MD stuff I'm doing some other stuff that's non-clinical. It's medical but non-clinical, so
Oh, okay.
consulting in different areas.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you got to stay active, right?
Yeah. Oh,
And
yeah.
that also
Absolutely.
seems like another key component of anti-aging is just keeping your body and your brain active.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Charles, this has been a
Yeah.
lovely chat.
Yeah. I've enjoyed it.
I
Thank you.
like to think you're not one of a kind, because I want to
All right.
believe strongly that
I hope
there
not.
are a lot of other
Yeah.
practitioners out there with this mindset, but I haven't met very many. So,
Yeah.
I appreciate you putting yourself out there to share your experiences and share your knowledge and your approach. And I'm hoping that you're inspiring a lot of other folks as well.
I hope so.
Just those of us that would be seeking some sort of care, or those that are giving care.
Yeah. Well, thank you for what you're doing too, because you're growing and you're helping a lot of people, and a lot of I know they'll benefit from what you're doing.
Yeah, and it took me a while, right? You discovered from an early age, okay, you want to be a doctor, you're going to help people,
Yeah.
and I it took me a while to realize that I wanted to do something where I could not just help people, but really see that I was helping people. And then it took me a while beyond that to like really figure out what that looked like.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, you were years ahead of me and kind of honing in on that, but it's always a journey, right? Because yours evolved
Yes.
and mine
Yeah.
continues to evolve as well. And I
Yeah.
like to think that, we all just kind of work complementary to each other.
Yeah. Definitely.
Lovely. Well, I will,
Yeah.
you gave me your link tree, so I will link to all of your resources in the show notes for today's episode at thesuperhumanblueprintpodcast.com. And I will also link to Dr. Charles on social media so you can follow him as well. He's got some great posts that he put up there for information, for motivation, a lot of good stuff on there. So Dr. Charles, thank you so much for being on
Right.
the show.
Hey, Drew, thank you so much for having me. Look forward to our continuing conversations.
Sounds great. Take care.
Yeah. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.